Okay, here we have a nice clean back plate. Now from this point on, I choose to handle all of this stuff with gloves on. Does it make a difference? I don't know. We've got one of these in place. What we're going to do is place this on there. You'll notice that there's keys. And what you want to do is get these things lined up. You can see the location of this changes the gap from side to side. So what you want to do is get it as close to dead center as you possibly can. And when you get it dead center, go ahead and lock the set screws down and we will move on from there. Okay, we got this locked in place, and you can see that it's spinning a whole lot easier than it did before. Maybe not. This is pretty close to being centered. So now what we have to do is take this back off and then turn around and put the wires and screws and everything all on together all at the same time. Okay, so now you're going to want to find the mark. Aren't you glad you put this mark on there before? Because all those holes just kind of look the same, don't they? So you're going to want to, whoops, going to want to start there, and that's where the first one is going to end up. Got the cover down here so I can lay this on top of it like so without running the risk of bending the little pin, okay, because it's easier to work from the back. What you're going to do is make sure that the holes in here are oriented with the pins on here, like so. This gets placed up underneath it. There's pins or bosses on the inside of the cover that engage that, so once it's put in place, it's pretty much locked. Now comes the phenolic washer. Now comes the flat washer. Now comes the lock washer, and then a screw through the wire terminal and snug it down. Make sure this is all locked in place. Make sure the pins are engaged, and then I give it another little snug just to get it in place, and I'm going to go around and tighten all of these later on. I like to put it all together before I tighten the screws, just in case I have to adjust something. One more little detail. These spacers are not square, they're rectangular. And you can put them on so that the holes don't line up properly. You can see there the spacer is square with the base. Look at this, if you rotate it at 90 degrees, the pins will lock into place, but you can see that it is no longer square. You want to make sure that spacer is put on properly so that it's square. Otherwise, these will not line up properly when you assemble them. Okay, now that we've got all of that in place, go around and just make sure all of these things are seated properly. At a glance, you can tell the gap is the same all the way around. I'm going to, as I was sitting here tightening these screws, it just so happened that there was a roll of masking tape sitting right over here, and I said, oh, I'll be darned. Look at this. It fits just perfectly right here. Makes a nice little working surface. You don't have to worry about bending the pin. Okay, we're going to put the cover on. Don't forget, look for your mark. Make sure you have it oriented right. Some of these snap together rather nicely, like that one does. Some of them can be a little bit of a booger to put together, but it's the luck of the draw on this. Now it's a matter of putting the outside screws back on. Okay, now we're ready to put these rear contacts in place. What we're going to do is, idea not to over tighten these things. Snug down. You remember that these are two different levels. This one is bent down and this one is, well, bent down but not quite so much. So obviously this is going to go on the bottom. And this one will go on top. Bosses that line up with the holes, so you're going to want to make sure that all of this stuff lines up just right. I want to make sure this in the center makes contact. Everything's lovely. Okay, we're kind of jumping through the reassembly of this thing because it's pretty straightforward. If you got this far, you ought to be able to put it back together. Just remember to pull all your threads through. This can be a little bit, let's just say, challenging. So I don't know that I have any suggestions to make it easier. Okay, just go ahead and run the wicks through the little tubes here. You're going to go ahead and wrap them around this felt material, drop it in the little bathtub there, and from that point we'll be ready to put this thing back into the organ.